Dobry wieczór Państwu. Witamy serdecznie na kolejnym wydarzeniu Copernicus Festival. Całe to spotkanie będzie w języku angielskim. Za chwilkę na ten język przejdziemy. Natomiast zanim to zrobimy, chciałem jeszcze wspomnieć i podziękować sponsorom i partnerom tego całego festiwalu. Partnerem Copernicus Festival jest Małopolska Organizacja Turystyczna. Projekt jest dofinansowany ze środków budżetu państwa przyznanych przez ministra nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego. Dofinansowano ze środków ministra kultury i dziedzictwa narodowego, pochodzących z Funduszu Promocji Kultury Państwowego Funduszu Celowego. Partnerem wydarzenia jest miasto Kraków. Copernicus Festival został objęty honorowym patronatem ministra nauki i szkolnictwa wyższego oraz prezydenta miasta Krakowa Aleksandra Miszalskiego.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's discussion. We are delighted to host you. This is Krzysztof Cipora, Associate Professor at the Loughborough University.
And that's Mateusz Chochol, Associate Professor at Jagiellonian University here in Krakow.
And together we'll host the discussion with, sorry for saying, but this is true, two brilliant minds. Stanislas Dehaene, you know him, but just to remember, Stan is a professor at the Collège de France and director of Neurospin. He's one of the most influential scientists and psychologists with very strong influence on reading, numeracy, our own field, consciousness, and many other fields.
And our second guest is Professor Terry Sejnowski, professor at Salk Institute and at University of California, San Diego. Probably some of you have already used ChatGPT or other AI agents, and I guess this is nice at some point after using such tools to see and meet one of the people whose work has laid grounds on this kind of instruments. So this is a very amazing moment to have Professor Sejnowski here with us too.
So the title of tonight's discussion is, do we need to reinvent school? Obviously in the context of AI and recent developments in educational neuroscience as well.
First, Professor Dan, I wanted to start with maybe a bit provocative question. So your recent book on learning, yeah, it's recent on one hand, but on the other hand, we might have an impression that since it was published a couple of years ago, learning opportunities have changed quite dramatically with like introducing AI tools, them being very popular, and also with normalizing online learning. And if you were to refresh or rewrite this book, what would you change? And is there something that you disagree, like out of the things that you wrote in the book after these recent developments?
That's a funny question. It's just been translating in Polish. I don't want to rewrite it, but no, actually, I think that the brain is the result of millions of years of evolution, and it's not changing like that. And I know that in education, people are talking now about 21st century skills and the digital world where kids are digital natives and so on. This is just not true. The brain is still very much the same. The brain of our children is very much the same. They are highly organized algorithms for learning that have been there for tens of thousands of years at least in the brain of Homo sapiens, and much more, much longer in the brains of all primates. So no, I don't think that we should change our education system dramatically because of AI. There may be some opportunities, but we have also to be really careful. Our kids are being submitted to a giant experiment against their will, in a sense, and sometimes to their detriment. There is, for instance, very interesting statistic by OECD, which is showing that the countries that invested the more in digital means in the past 20 years, we're not talking about AI, but just digital education, they were the ones that progressed the less. Okay, so there is no clear sense in which having more digital equipment in schools is better. Human brain requires very simple things, and especially human interactions, as I stressed in my talk, and that should be the key. The teacher is still going to be the key.
And also in your book, the subtitle is that the brain kind of outperforms all the artificial systems in learning, or does it differently?
Yeah.
Do you still agree with that?
Okay, that may be something that we need to slowly or quickly refresh. It's very difficult because in AI things are going so quickly, right? However, I still think that the brain is superior in its ability to grasp abstract knowledge from the evidence that it gets. Scientific knowledge. There is still no AI scientific agent. It's coming, no? It's interesting, but it's not there yet. And even in simple things like mathematics, current models like ChatGPT are really easy to fool, and in other domains as well, right? So, and remember, the brain consumes 20 watts, and we should talk about the energy consumption of these huge AI models, but they are a million times larger. So the brain is really an amazing machine. I would not retract from that.
Professor Sejnowski, would you agree? Or do you think that the brain is substantially different from at least current machines?
Yes and no. So it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. I know because I've tried. But one of the things we know about education, and by the way, I agree completely with Stan's opinion about education, that we've developed, by the way, education is an invention of something you don't see in other species. And then we spend so many years learning how to read, learning how to do mathematics, for example. But one thing we know about education is that by far the best way to educate a child's brain is one-on-one interaction with another human being, a tutor, who is a good educator, number one. Number two, knows the child and can help the child get through difficult concepts. Unfortunately, that's a very labor-intensive and expensive way for society to train our children. Now, parents, of course, do a pretty good job, but we really need, we're going to need, if we want all children to be able to have the best possible education, I think we're going to have individual AIs as tutors and companions with each child that can follow the child through their development and help the child answer questions, be able to provide support. And that will allow children in every country, when AI becomes proliferates, and it's, by the way, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of data centers going up right now everywhere. Even in Saudi Arabia now, they're going to put up a huge 100 gigawatt power plant, so they can train people in that region, so that AI can be disseminated in that region. But nonetheless, I think what we have here is a technology that is at the very beginning, the very early stages. By the way, it's a very the architecture of these models, their neural network models, is it has some properties that you see in brains. There's a lot of simple units, highly interconnected. The secret sauce is learning. So learning turned out to be the really key to creating something that's becoming, I wouldn't say AI is intelligent yet, but is becoming more intelligent.
Professor Sejnowski, you contributed to building the foundations for today's AI, and in your book, The Deep Learning Revolution, I strongly recommend it. Is accessible in Polish also. You described the work of other pioneers back then, back to these pioneering times, did you think that this could change the way we teach and look at the world?
Well, this going back to the 80s was a time when AI was dominated by symbol processing, mentioned by Stan in his lecture. And the idea was that language looks a lot like symbols. Words look like symbols, and you put them in different order, and you get different meanings. And this is, by the way, the remarkable thing about the brain is that it learns language so quickly. And it may well be that a lot of it is pre-wired, ready to learn a particular language. One thing we know, for example, is the sounds, the phonemes they're called, the sounds of language. There's already particular sounds that the child's brain, the baby's brain, is sensitive to. And what happens when the child comes into the world and learns, and even before actually, because the baby can hear in the womb sounds, and that does affect the brain. The brain is already taking information in at that point, and a tremendous amount of synapses are being laid down. But what happens is, this is work of Pat Cool, that each language picks a subset of those sounds and erects all of the words and speech and eventually reading based on that subset. And so I heard recently Eddie Chang give a fantastic talk where, again, in epilepsy patients, he was able to record from Wernicke's area, which is a partner with Broca. And what he's shown is really quite remarkable, is that one of the most important things that the brain has to do is take continuous speech, which if you look at a spectrogram doesn't have words. There's no boundaries between words when you're talking. It's just sound. But the brain immediately in Wernicke's area segments those continuous sounds into words. So this is really exciting, because now we see a way for the brain to begin to take words and make them into wholes somewhere in the Wernicke's area.
But I think you and I may slightly disagree on this, but I think there is something very special about the human brain in particular, because it seems that only humans make this sort of very strong categorical boundaries, creating symbolic structures by parsing, for instance, the auditory continuum into very sharp boundary between phonemes, and we do that all over the place. For instance, in the domain of number that I studied a lot, we are the only species who make these very categorical distinctions between, let's say, 99 and 100. Completely different numbers, but no other animal species is able to think this sort of thought at all. So I will continue to defend the idea that there's something particular about the symbolic machine in the brain. Of course, at the end, it has to be built on neurons, but somehow we still haven't figured how it becomes this sort of symbolic machine that is approximated by our symbolic computers. I think there's a very rich line of research there that needs to be pursued.
Well, it's true that you can train a brain to go through a sequence of steps to solve problems, and at a pace of about 1 operation per second, compared to a computer that's doing trillions of operations per second. So we can simulate a digital computer, but I'm not sure whether what the brain is actually doing is equivalent. Maybe it's doing something a little bit, it's doing that, but in a way that is using, well, first of all, a different architecture, but also of a different, what we call a representation. And let me just give one example. In these large language models, the words are not entered as symbols, as just numbers. This is the word apple, this is the word Copernicus. Every word is embedded into a very high-dimensional vector. A vector is just a lot of numbers strung together, but those numbers are not random. Those numbers are picked because they contain information about the semantics of the word. That is to say, the meaning and the associations with other words. And that is very important, not just at the beginning, the input, but it's also important in each of the layers of the network. And what you find, just what Sam pointed out, is that it becomes more and more abstract as you go up. But it's always distributed in a very high dimensional space. That is to say, high dimensional vectors. So I think there's a richness that you can have with that kind of representation, which we now know is semantic. With the core representations up in those upper levels carry meaning, not just the meanings of the symbols, as well as maybe something that is discrete.
Let's focus on educational neuroscience for a moment. So psychology is science, neurobiology is science, and many people would say that teaching is rather kind of the art. So what are the upsides and maybe the downsides of bringing discoveries or findings from neuroscience and psychology into the education at the different level of education system and particular instances in the schools?
I don't think that teaching is a science, but teaching should be based on science. Just like medicine should be based on biology. It's impossible to imagine medicine without connection to a biological foundation, but it's still somehow possible for teachers to be sent to schools without good knowledge of how the brain learns. And that, I think, is what is wrong at the current moment and is slowly being corrected. There is a lot that we know about the human brain and how it learns, and just simple psychology, by the way. It starts with cognitive science, experiments that just look at the behavior and how it improves under specific conditions without even looking at the brain. This knowledge should be known by teachers. In the domain of reading, it's super clear. There's a huge science of reading. It's actually been known for about 30 years now, and it's still not sufficiently used in schools. I mentioned Brazil. We're going to Brazil. In Brazil, there are still many inspectors who actually forbid the use of phonics in schools. Okay. It is crazy because we know that this is the way that the brain learns to read is by decoding letters into phonemes, and this is the most efficient way. There's a beautiful convergence between neuroscience and education sciences there because both have shown exactly the same thing. This is the most efficient way to learn to read. So it's just an example. There's so much more. So I've started now for 8 years the Scientific Council for Education in France. I was called by the Minister of Education, Jean-Michel Blanquer, 8 years ago, to create a council of scientists, and we are 30 now, who advise the ministry and advise the teachers and the teachers of teachers about the recent or less recent scientific discoveries and how they could be used in schools. And I think it's super important. We are discovering that there are really applicable sources of knowledge, such as, for instance, sleep. There is a lot of discussion right now about the importance of sleep as a consolidator of knowledge that you've learned during the day. And if you make better use of that to alternate learning and sleep, you consolidate learning much better. So many, many examples like that. I'm all for teachers having more training, and each time I give a lecture to teachers, they come to me and they say, why didn't I learn this in teacher school? You know, it should have been taught to me. It could have been taught to me. It's not so recent stuff either. So there's a lot that we should really convey to teachers now.
So, Stan, in the U.S., it's even worse than it is here.
It's always like that, right? Make America worse again.
Education. No, this is very sad. So when I went to school, I was taught phonics, which is exactly the point Stan was making. What are the sounds of the letters? Now, in English, it's very irregular. There's some rules, but there are also exceptions. And I'm going to actually give you an example of that. My lecture on Sunday, I trained a network to pronounce English, which is non-trivial, back in the 80s. But the fact is that now you cannot teach phonics in California, and it's been banished. It's ridiculous. And one of the consequences is that the students now can't spell. Okay, but it's worse. It gets worse. So another thing we know that from psychology and from neuroscience is that in addition to the cognitive learning system that we use, that schools are trying to teach, knowledge and facts and things, there's also another part of the brain that learns procedurally, that is to say, by practice. So, if you want to read, you have to practice. You read, and you get better, and what that learning system is working together with the cognitive system to take things that you practice and automatize them so you don't have to think about it. Now, it's absolutely essential that you lay that foundation early, and the reason is, and it's not just for reading, it's for numbers. You need to put those circuits into the brain that Stan was showing you early so you can build on them. You can build more complex math on them. Well, the educational elite at schools of education in the U.S. have banned practice in schools because they don't think it's as efficient as the cognitive system. And so this is terrible because the U.S., which used to be near the top quartile in international tests, is now in the bottom quartile. And I think that this is what happens when you turn your back on science and you turn your back on good practice that has been traditional, and this is very sad. Barbara Oakley and I have a MOOC, massive open online course called Learning How to Learn, where we emphasize these basics. It's very popular. It's wildly popular. There are 6 million people who have taken the course. It's free. It's online, Coursera, and from 200 countries, ages 10 to 90. So, and we hope that this will have some impact on students in the U.S.
I want to mention that it's not hopeless. And there are some places like in New York or Mississippi, there are states that are actually going back to phonics. It's a pity that it's a cycle, but I hope that the cycle will cease its oscillations slowly and we converge. There is one issue, which is that it tends to be in autocratic countries, for instance, Bolsonaro's Brazil, that suddenly, teaching becomes threatened, like it is in the US right now. Education is being threatened. It's really dramatical. Our point of view is that the brain is this extraordinary machine. It's present in every single child. Every baby is born with this supercomputer, and we should turn it to its utmost potential, basically. And that's what education is about. But many of these more autocratic countries, they think that it's quite okay to have this lower class of people who don't know how to read, who just can serve others. That's not right, and I think we should fight it, and this is quite urgent in the US at the moment.
So then maybe turning to a bit, hopefully more optimistic visions. So Professor Sejnowski, you mentioned that in the ideal world, they should be this personalized AI tutors, which would be like following the student in the learning process. And I was also thinking along these lines, and this would hopefully bring some benefits from the adaptive learning, fitting to the current level of the learner and so on. So there would be some benefits. And similarly to like introducing automatization or AI in the industry, we get some extra capacities. And then would you rather see it as a form of, okay, we use the same time we would be using before and we just teach more, or you would rather be opting for giving some quote unquote dividend to the students. So if they learned what they kind of should have learned within the traditional curriculum, but saved 20% of time, should they just spend it on like some playful activities which are also important for the learning process?
I'd like to hear what Stan has to say about that.
I don't know. I don't believe in the, a sort of Skinnerian view of teaching where you get rewards and punishments depending on how you learn. That it's not really the way children learn, I think, or at least not the way they learn optimally. What people have found is that little children are a little bit like scientists. They explore, they make experiments, they try their own things. This is something that starts very early on. So some of you may have young babies and you may be upset because they push things from their tables and they made them drop. And it turns out that they are experimenting about gravity. So think about it. It's wonderful, right? They're little Newtons. They don't understand about gravity. This has been shown very clearly. They don't understand that if objects are not sustained, they will fall. So they have to experiment with that, and they will go through a whole series of stages that are well documented by René Baillargeon. So that's how kids learn, at least in the sort of most natural manner. And then, of course, in our schools, we channel it. We present explicit teaching because we don't wait for them to rediscover all of science. That would be way too slow, right? So we want explicit teaching. But I think we should keep this balance between wonderful exploration and play and some moments of explicit teaching. And no punishment, really. It doesn't work this way. Neither rewards, just the natural reward of learning that you're learning.
Yeah. But I mean rather like adaptivity in terms, maybe even similar, but just going several steps ahead of what you have done in the number race game, which was also like adapting to the pace of the specific learner. If so this would be like upscaled to everything that students learn.
It's true. We can make software that tracks how children are doing. I'm sure we can optimize things much better. You mentioned artificial tutors. It's possible probably for AI now to very finely monitor what the child is doing, build a sort of computer model of what the child is thinking and what could go wrong and sort of guide it optimally. It's not quite there yet, by the way, I think, but it's an important goal for research. That would be really nice, and hopefully we could facilitate learning. I'm just worried that we should not keep the human out of the loop. The kids really expect humans. You mentioned Pat Cool. There is a gorgeous experiment by Pat Cool where she looks at phoneme learning, as you mentioned, with the presence of an actual tutor or in the presence of a TV. And this is the same exact person speaking on the television, very good Chinese, super nice colored television. The baby is getting wonderful stimulation, but zero learning from the television compared to the actual human. And that's an actual experiment that's been done. It seems that the baby is expecting a dialogue. I mentioned in my talk a dialogue with the human person. Probably if there was a real interactive computer, we could replace the person by some kind of tutor. But let's be very careful. It's not easy to replace all of the subtlety of the human being attending to the child. That will take time before it can be replaced, I think. And I'm not sure we want it to be replaced, by the way.
You know, you're absolutely right. And this actually brings up the issue about the social brain. Yeah. So, learning isn't just about facts. It's learning how to interact with other human beings. And this experiment with Pat Cool illustrates that we learn better when we are dealing with all of the social aspects, like, for example, a smile. It's actually a positive reinforcer. I wouldn't call it a reward necessarily, but it's a positive reinforcer. And babies, part of the reason they're so cute is they smile, and parents often smile to the child to elicit a smile, right? And this is what's going on there. Well, they're helping the baby learn about human communication. Human communication is more than words. Human communication involves facial expressions. Human communication involves actions that are taken, and prosody, the fact that you can raise your voice, and that's different from just the word because you are emphasizing something, emphasis. And all of that, of course, it doesn't come out of ChatGPT. I've never heard it raise an angry voice to me, but maybe it should. But in any case, we're at the very beginning of this process of exploring these issues, and it's it really is exciting that we can now do experiments. Okay, let me give one example. We had a Science of Learning Center at UCSD. It was back about 10 years ago, sponsored by the NSF, and it involved 10 universities. And one of the projects was Ruby. Ruby was a robot that we put into a preschool. And these are 18-month-old kids running around, and they pick up a toy, and then they have very short attention spans. They throw it down. And suddenly Ruby appears. Wow, what's this? And Ruby had arms, and it could pick things up, and it had these big eyes, and it had eyebrows that went up and down, and it could look at things. It was a cute robot. It had a Teletubby, so you could interact with it. So the first thing that happened is the boys ran up to Ruby and yanked its arms off. Okay, well, back to the shop. Now, you don't put an industrial arm on a robot with little kids, but what they did was they put a pressure sensor. And when it exceeded a certain pressure, Ruby would cry. And the boys would back off. Why? That's a social signal that they know about. Now, what would happen after the boys backed off was the girls would go and hug Ruby.
That's very sexist.
I'm just reporting the experiment, okay? This is what happened. By the way, the neuronal man should also have a neuronal woman.
It's encompassing.
But no, we learned a lot. It turned out we learned more from the children than they learned from us. And the main part of that experiment was things that we were afraid that the teachers would be worried that the robots are going to take over from them, but teachers loved Ruby. Why? Because they kept the attention of the kids. The kids would love to point at something, and Ruby would go up and look at it. And the kids just kept doing it over and over again. And by the way, another good thing was if they get something right, if you're teaching them a new language, for example, with the Teletubby, if you played their favorite song, they loved it, right? Kids love particular songs. So I think I disagree with you about the reward part. I think that it is a part of growing up, is that there are things that we do. One last thing, play. You mentioned play. Play is an essential part of interacting with the world and discovering things about the world through actions, and it's not unique to humans. A lot of animals play. You've probably seen, if you have a dog, or if you just look at animals in nature, they spend a lot of their time doing the same thing. I think that's part of the development of the brain, not just of humans.
I just want to clarify, of course, there are rewards. What I wanted to say is that there are internal rewards as well as external rewards. And some of the best learning is occurring without actually getting an external reward or punishment, but because you get your own reward by discovery. Curiosity is a very interesting algorithm, which probably is missing from many machines at the moment. It's the ability to explore and learn exactly where you think you can learn. This is very interesting. There's this hypothesis that what curiosity is the ability to attend to places where you think you can learn something. So they're just close enough that you can learn and far enough that you don't already know. You're not bored, right? That's a neural definition of curiosity, which is quite interesting.
It's absolutely right that if you worked really hard on something, and then suddenly you get the idea. You get a burst of dopamine. Okay, dopamine is the brain's internal reward system, and just being able to understand something is its own reward.
And I met a teacher once who said, we're still discussing what's the best way to teach mathematics. I think for reading we know well, but for mathematics less clear, and we are discussing a lot. But one teacher once told me, every child should know the eureka moment. And I thought this is a great statement. I really believe in this. The eureka moment where you discover by yourself, you think you discover by yourself. Of course, other people have already made it, but you as a child, you made this nice little discovery, and it's like, and you may become a mathematician.
Okay, how many people in the audience have had a eureka moment? Put up your hand.
Oh, good.
Okay, well, that's great.
That's about half of the room.
Yeah, that's pretty
wonderful.
good. That's
Wonderful.
great.
Maybe teaching of math is good in Poland.
Yeah, so speaking of learning math, we have this metaphor or like even a meme nowadays in the internet that people are sending greetings to the math teachers that they told who told them some years ago, probably to my generation, maybe a bit older ones, that you will not always carry a pocket calculator with you. Right, that's maybe not the valid argument. And also, in terms of like discussing assessments for like university students, we are, while emphasizing why they should not be using AI for writing their essays or so, we are kind of afraid that we are still using this. You will not always carry the pocket calculator with you, while it's now integrated with WhatsApp, with, I don't know, messengers, with like almost everywhere you would get these AI tools. So is this a good argument on one hand, or also whether like writing essays is just useless in the future, like the traditional library search that was practiced before the internet search engines have been introduced. It's also just quote unquote useless because it's not as fast, not as efficient, and we would not have possibility to access all the information. So what would be your point of view on that?
Okay, well, we're going through this period of adapting to a new technology, and there's always many things that have to be thought through, and there will be changes. And by the way, I mean it's the changes are occurring much more quickly than they would with a lot of other technologies. It's really difficult for us to adapt literally during our lifetime. Normally, like automobiles, right? That it was horses, and then there was a few automobiles, and they were very clunky, and then it took generations before that became universal. Same thing with what's going on now. But let's take a look at the problem with students using ChatGPT in school. Okay, this is you know, in the U.S. there are states that have banned students from using it, right, in school, and for the reason that you gave, which is that, you know, they're not going to be able to gain the skills of writing a good essay and becoming good writers. Okay, so I came across a teacher who realized that really the problem is that it's a tool, and you have to learn how to use the tool. And the brain actually, when it is given a tool, it can actually benefit, and it can do things it couldn't do otherwise. And so what the teacher did was, when the students came in, he says, I want you to write an essay about the French Revolution. And the first thing I want you to do is go to ChatGPT and ask it to write an essay for you. Wow, okay, that seems like cheating. No, but then this teacher says, now we want you to correct that essay. I want you to, there's going to be hallucinations, there are going to be flaws, and I want you to put your own spin on it, you know, your own style. I want you to understand how to use English that is more expressive. And then they get 2 grades. How good was your prompt? Because it makes a huge difference whether how you be if you're more explicit, and if you give more detail, you get more out of it. Okay, that's part of learning how to use the tool. Number 2, how well do they correct it? Now, here's what's happening. Of course, everyone in the world is now using ChatGPT. In fact, I'm a president of a foundation that runs the biggest AI meeting, Neural Information Processing Systems, NeurIPS. Do you know that it now looks as if like 10-20% of all the reviews are being written by ChatGPT of the papers, you know? And I just wonder if anybody's using it to write the papers themselves. I mean, you know, this is really, it is a problem. But the point is, though, that using the tool, the students will be able to be more efficient. They'll be, and by the way, computer programmers are already using it, Copilot, in order to, to write, 90% of writing code is basically repetitive. It's just do the same thing over and over again. That could be done really well by Copilot. And then it helps the coder actually be more efficient. They're able to see things and bugs that they wouldn't have otherwise, because ChatGPT can identify the bugs for them. So it's a tool, and you have to know how to use it.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've said it all. Every generation has been afraid of new tools. So there is a very old text of the time of Plato, where they ask whether reading will ruin everybody's brain, because it will ruin your memory. Suddenly, you don't have to know everything by heart. You can find it in a book. Right? Of course, we know it's not true. It's actually beneficial to the brain to learn to read. It's beneficial for everything, for your vocabulary, your syntax, etc. So it might be the same with these new tools. We don't know yet, right? That's the issue, right? There's a little bit of uncertainty. I'm a little bit worried that the new AI tools may destroy the will to learn. If you're a child these days and you see this extraordinary machine that writes in English, and you're struggling as a French student to learn English, and you see that, even with 3 years of learning English, you're very far behind, what's the point, right? So there is a certain demotivation of students these days, which is worrying.
Well, when automobiles came around, people didn't have to use bicycles. They didn't have to walk. They didn't have to run. But they still do.
Yeah, and that's what I expect too. I think they will. I think we will do what we enjoy, basically, and that's basically what tools are about. They liberate us and they make us do what we enjoy. I suspect that we will still enjoy each other's company very much, and so we will want this social brain to be best developed in young children. And we would like to have music. We would like to have improvisation together. We would like to have perhaps theater, texts, but if we can be liberated from the more formal aspects of having to file your taxes or write a letter to your taxman, maybe that will be better. I say this because I don't know about you, but we get a lot of requests from administration. Can you write a paragraph about why this student needs to be hired or whatever? And all of that is done by ChatGPT now. And maybe the reading of it is done by ChatGPT as well.
So what should we be teaching the next generation or generations so they can shape AI instead of just being shaped by AI in terms of thinking, cognition, and so on?
Well, I think that, AI is a very young... okay, what age do you think ChatGPT is? When you interact with it, what do you think?
Oh, you mean when you interact?
Yeah, when you have an image of what age it is, I mean, what do you think?
50?
15? Okay.
50. 50.
Oh, 50. Okay, how many people think it's younger than 50, 50? Okay. So I think the reality is that it probably has an age that's much closer to 15, 15, but very precocious, a precocious child, adolescent. And here's the reasoning. Brains, not only do they play, but children growing up have fantasy friends that they talk to. And they play with toys like, trucks and things, and they have battles with, their toy soldiers and things. This is incredible, right? They believe in Santa Claus, right? They believe in things that don't exist, and they really do. Right. Of course, we sort of don't correct them because it's kind of nice for them to have something that they look forward to on Christmas, right? But that's the stage that AI is going through right now. I think it's really it's even earlier than an adolescent, and it hasn't yet matured. And I think that's going to take decades and decades and decades. And by the way, the particular architectures that we have today are really primitive compared to the brain. And as we put in more realistic architectures, for example, ChatGPT is a feed-forward network, and we know that the brain it's a recurrent neural network. It feeds back on itself. So we have a long way to go for AI to even approach what is going on in the brain.
What impresses me, though, about AI, you ask me whether I would want to qualify my statement that the brain is superior. There's one way in which computers are superior for a number of years now. It's in the ability not to forget, the ability to compile information. The reason I was thinking that ChatGPT is 50 years old at least is that it knows a little bit about everything. It is a highly cultivated person, right? You can ask it about, I don't know, some rivers in Venezuela, and it will know. It will tell you the lengths and whatever. It will tell you a little bit about everything. And of course, Google Maps these days, for a long time, has had every single place on Earth in a way that no human being has ever had in his own life, right? So, and there is one thing about AI is that it doesn't die. It accumulates. That's very, very different from biology, where unfortunately, all that we've learned, my father died 2 years ago, and he was 94. It was perhaps a normal age to die, but what a disaster, right? All of this accumulated knowledge suddenly vanishes, and is gone. And I think this
Did
is.
you write a book? Write a book?
No, not really. So a lot of it is just lost. I think even if he wrote a book, I write books, but it's not the same as having the accumulated knowledge about social context. He went through 2 wars and so on, Algeria war as well. So we forget. Humans forget, they have to relearn generation after generation. AI doesn't have to go through that. It may be able to accumulate much better than we do. I suspect that in the long run, that's going to be a huge advantage. Once we find architectures that learn almost as well as the human brain, what will make the difference is the amount of knowledge that it's able to go through. And that's huge in the case of AI. And that's almost scary, actually. But
I kind of think of them as idiot savants, actually.
at the moment,
At the
yes,
moment, yeah.
I agree.
Very specialized knowledge, but not necessarily deep.
Okay. Okay, so the last one from our side, because we have this discussion about using AI to both help the teachers, using students using AI to kind of solve the problems, answer the questions. And aren't you afraid that the learner would be actually kicked out from the learning process, that it would be just AI agent producing some assignments, some teaching, and then another AI agent solving the tests, solving the quizzes, and then it's sort of like both the teacher and the student are out of the equation?
If children do this, they are stupid. That's really not what learning is about. And I hope we can convince them that it's not what learning is about. That's just cheating to get rid of classroom, right? But I hope that several children can figure out for themselves that this is about developing their own potential. What I try to write in my books is that we have in between our ears this most extraordinary machine. It's unmatched, really. And we have a limited time to develop it. That's why we invented education. I think we discovered that education was a great invention because we discovered that this is about its 20-year period during which the brain is super plastic and we can stuff it with a lot of knowledge. So I hope that children can realize that. I say this with great hope because I know some experiments where children are taught about their own brains and suddenly they realize, what potential it has, that they must sleep better, for instance. I think we should learn more about our own brains and children should learn more about their own brains, and then they would find out that there's no point in cheating with ChatGPT. What you want is self-development, basically. I hope this will happen.
So remember the story of Ruby. We thought that the teachers would reject it, but the teachers actually embraced it as a tool that they could use to help organize the class. And you know, it's how to use the tool is going to be different from the way teachers are teaching now. And the question is, the real problem? Okay, here's the sad ending for our project. So we learned a lot, and we said, look, why don't we need to, we have an N of one. From one, it was a charter school on campus, but every school is different. In different, there are 10,000 school districts in the U.S., and that means that if you want to go and get into a school, you got to go and knock on 10,000 doors, right? And even if you get in one of the doors, you then have the problem with the unions. The unions have rules about what you can introduce into the classroom. Even if the teacher wants to teach something, they may not be allowed to. And so the reality is that the real problem with education is not the science. The real problem with education is the social problem that we have with our educational structure. And that's a problem that I don't think AI is going to be able to solve.
Thank you so much. And now we open the floor for questions from the audience.
So, if someone, okay, I see. Let's start here.
I would like ask about school. Maybe not school, but let's imagine that you have 10 or 11-year-old child, and how to educate him to go to school for 6 hours or 45-minute lessons, or subjects, or maybe project, or maybe no rings or no marks. And what about subjects? Maybe it should be math, physics, chemistry, or maybe together. And could you tell how do you imagine that system, education system, should be looked like?
Such a simple question. It sounds like you want us to reinvent the whole education system, and that sounds a bit ambitious. Behind your question, there is a difficult issue, which is what should we teach? It's not clear actually to me. So, for instance, in France, we have several hours of history and several hours of geography, and yet you can find the answers, very easily to many of the questions about history and geography. So why do we teach them? I think there is a deep reason, which is that they are important conceptual structures that you want to acquire through these lessons, except that they are not very well singled out in many cases. So you teach about facts in history, and you hope that somehow the students will digest the deep structures about democracy and historical patterns and so on. So I think there is an important work to do, which is perhaps of a certain cognitive science nature, which is to understand what sort of education transforms our brains the most, what is the most important, and what will not occur naturally by experience. And there was a moment, my kids are now in their 30s, but when they were young, they had computer lessons and they learned to print. And I was silly. I was incredibly silly. They learned to click on the proper place to print a page on the printer. And I thought, none of us had to learn that. Well, it's some things that you learn during your lifetime. So no, school should not learn how to print stuff. School should learn things that deeply transform your brain. I don't think we have a full catalog of that, but I militate very strongly, I argue very strongly for mathematics as one of the key tools that deeply transform your thinking in a very positive way, makes you more logical, more with better arguments and so on. So for me, ideal education should have a very strong social component, as you said, but also mathematical component, linguistic component, and education to democracy would be one of the important bits of it as well.
Well, to pick up on that last part, I think a lot of what happens in schools, especially K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, is really social and cultural socialization. And that is to say, what kind of a culture are they living in? How do you treat other people? How do you interact with your other kids at different? And by the way, I think that the real problem that I see is that the structure of schools today is based on the assembly line. This is Henry Ford had this assembly line where you went from station to station, and there's the teacher is putting in the rivets here, and another teacher puts in the headlight, that's not. And by the way, classes, you have 20 students, and every student's at a different level. You can't deal with them individually. You have to sort of teach to the middle, not to the. You can't help the ones that are falling behind as much as you'd like, and you can't really inspire the smartest students. This is not a good system that we have inherited. So we need to have something that really is more individual, and that's why you say an AI tutor could help. But how to integrate that in, and how to, because that would not help with the socialization. In fact, AI itself needs socialization. It's called alignment. so it's a more complicated problem.
Who's next? Okay. There.
Hi, thank you. I want to ask, I teach at a School of Architecture, and a lot of architecture is problem solving, but there's part of designing something, especially in great architecture, the concept, and we don't know where it comes from. It just like an eureka moment. It comes from very understanding something, and you get an idea, you get a solution, and it's more connected to art. And to evaluate this idea, you need your body. Like, how do you react? How does it make you feel? So, do you think that AI that doesn't have a body, or the body is some server, I don't know, somewhere? Do you think that AI could be a tool in learning or teaching this intuitive things that we really not always know how to call on or describe? I hope this makes sense, what I'm asking.
Actually, one of the things that AI's gotten really good at is images, creating images. And in fact, I know a lot of architects now who traditionally have met with the clients who want to build a house, and they ask what kind of a house, and so we want a Victorian house, and we want to have a gable, and they come up with some ideas. The architect goes away, and he knows roughly what they want, and he comes up with a drawing, and the client says, well, I like this and I like that, but it doesn't have the roominess of the windows. You have to iterate. Okay, so now, because of the fact that you can sit down with the client and put their words into the program and have it generate 10 examples, and the client says, oh, I like this one here, I don't like that one, and you can go immediately now and say, okay, let's take this one and now give it a prompt, and the architect knows the technical words to use in order to aim it toward what the client is saying informally, and by the end of that session, you converge on a design that the client seems to be happy with and fulfills the architectural constraints, because that's what the architect knows and puts that in. So we begin to see now that the relationship and by the way, talking about creativity. I actually, what surprises me is that AI can be just as creative as humans. And this was apparent, for example, in AlphaGo. This is the program that DeepMind trained to play Go at a championship level. It beat the Chinese Go champion, Ke 3-0. And it wasn't just winning the game. Ke wasn't even in the game. In other words, AlphaGo had discovered moves that no human had ever tried before, which were superior. positions. Go is by far the most complicated game that humans have been, traditionally been playing for thousands of years. It was creative, right? And it's creative. In fact, writers use it because it hallucinates, and for writers, hallucinating is creativity. So, I think that I'm not sure how you'd incorporate this into an architecture school, but it would be interesting to see how that plays out.
Okay, so our time is up. So thank you so much for joining the discussion. Thank you to the guests who also came to the thing, and that's it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And see you at the tomorrow events of the festival. Everyone is more than welcome.
Yes, and please also don't forget about Professor Sejnowski's lecture on Sunday if you want to hear more about AI.
Also, he will be guest of the discussion with Vice Rector of the Jagiellonian University, Professor Bartosz Brożek.